Welcome to TGS Transform, Grow, Succeed, a podcast focused on helping you uncover, discover, and recover the values that guide your work and to live those values out loud. I'm your host, Tim Gravoy. My goal is to uncover all the innovative ways that you can drive meaningful change in your organization and provide insights into implementing them starting today. Today, we're going to talk about centralizing youth voice, mainly when designing behavioral supports. Check-in, check-out, or CICO, is a common framework for behavioral support and tends to work reasonably well in various schools and contexts. However, over the last few years, Orange Grove Middle School has reimagined check-in, check-out by elevating how youth participate in the process right from the start. Mr. Mark Rubentols, principal of Orange Grove Middle School, and Dr. Mary Franco, assistant principal of Orange Grove Middle School, are joining us today because they've done just that. Youth are in charge of setting their own highly tailored goals and achieving them with the support of a dedicated, trained coach. Orange Grove Middle School serves students in grades 6 through 8 and is part of the Catalina Foothills Unified School District. Friends, did I get that right?
That's correct.
All right, fantastic. Let's dive in. So check-in, check-out is a common framework for behavior intervention. It's all over the place, especially for schools implementing positive behavior intervention and supports, or PBIS. Check-in, check-out, though, it might be new to some listeners. Would you be able to share a bit about what check-in, check-out looked like when you first started?
Sure. So when we first started, we went pretty much by the book as faithfully as we could with the PBIS system, which meant that kids carried around slips of paper to individual teachers. And then those teachers at the end of every period needed to meet with those students and then mark off on a scale of 0 to 2 how our three values are: respect, responsibility, and compassion. So they had to mark off for each student the degree to which they were respectful, responsible, and compassionate during that class period, for every class period. And then they would then meet with their check-out coach at the end of the day. Sorry, at the beginning of the day, meet with the check-in coach, get the piece of paper, go through the whole day, get the paper signed, return the paper at the end of the day to the check-out coach. And then we had a coordinator who was, the goal was to then collect all those at the end of the week, enter the data, and then be able to, make changes to student programs based on that.
So actually, that is exactly what I would think of as a classic check-in, check-out would look like. There's a meeting with a coach at the end of the beginning of the day. That's not one of the classroom teachers. The student, gets some feedback throughout the day. Trying to keep it as positive as we can and pre-teach, for the next period. At the end of the day, there's another conversation with a check-out coach, and that's what happens then. So it looks pretty standard in terms of what you would typically do with a PBIS trainer. I was that person, in fact. So given all of that, what were you noticing that made you look at changing how students experience check-in, check-out?
Mary, you want to take this? Because you were right there.
So we in that first year, we kind of discovered several challenges with the way that the classic system was laid out for us. I know that this has been quite successful in many systems, but for us, probably the biggest issue that we had right off the bat was just the tracking system kind of fell on its face immediately, because asking middle schoolers to carry a sheet with them to 7 teachers throughout the day, hang on to that signature, and then get it into the right hands for data collection. That was challenge number 1. Another issue that we kind of discovered right off the bat also was that really the rating system became somewhat subjective. And this was not by the fault of the folks who were by all means trying to assign scores based on their best judgment, but just really assigning it to these general values left it up for some interpretation. Respect, responsibility, and compassion can look and feel different for different teachers. And then kind of a secondary issue around that is that's a really big load to bear for a kid, to have to go from being the kid who was assigned to the system because they were obviously having behavioral challenges to suddenly having to achieve a score across the board in these really grand, huge kind of idealistic values. So that was another issue. We also had some issues with kids being pulled into the system maybe prematurely. So for example, We based our intake off of students receiving X number of referrals in an X period of time. And if we had some teachers, let's say, who were maybe still struggling with classroom management, they may have been rushing kids into that system because they were, over assigning teacher managed referrals. And that for us is an issue that needs to be tackled in a different way. Maybe that teacher needs support. So we had to sort of look at our intake criteria and like how kids are even getting into the system in the first place. So I would say right off the bat, the paper trail, the data collection, these kind of overarching, somewhat subjective values that they had to achieve high scores in, and we were just getting bombarded. We had a large number of kids qualifying based off of our criteria.
The three issues that I heard you talk about is, one is just how is the daily point card that often happens with check in, check out supposed to get from place to place to place to place, given the huge number of places that has got to get to. Also just that the values themselves, while I know they're all over Orange Grove, when I talk to your students, they're there. When I see them on the posters that are all over the place, they're not exactly foreign to the vocabulary of students. And nevertheless, though, you were finding that you had students that were referred to check and check out for a reason, and we're kind of expected to have a very high bar for all three of those values straight away. And then finally, it just not really the students that check and check out was designed for. So most schools would go about that with, all right, we're going to assign somebody to track the papers down. We're going to just train teachers how to use the rating system with better fidelity. And we're going to talk to the students about what respect and responsible and compassion mean and look like. And that'll take us probably a week and we'll be done. You all went about it, saw those problems in a very, very different way. I'm wondering, like, what, but I'm wondering, did you try any of those first and decide that it just still wasn't working?
Yes, we definitely tried assigning somebody. I think we tried a different format even for getting that information around. We tried having teachers keep the papers themselves as opposed to them moving with the student. I feel like our kids and teachers actually knew in a broad context what respect, responsibility, compassion meant. But I think the cognitive load for a teacher at the end of a period with 30 kids to be able to assess one student and say whether they were compassionate or not, I think that was really hard, when they're trying to finish up their classroom. So I don't know, Mary, did we try anything else? I feel like we tried like 4 or 5 different ways to increase data collection and fidelity. And we made some progress, but it just never felt like we really had a hold of it in the way that we wanted it to.
So there were some things that were tried, and a lot of the things that I would generally recommend to schools that are working with check in, check out, do these kind of easy fixes first, see how they work. They generally do. But what you all did after trying a lot, like it wasn't that you didn't, because I remember we met about this a lot. I was looking at your data a lot. We did a lot of work and thinking through what this was going to go through, and it turned out that what Orange Grove decided to do was something dramatically different. And I'm wondering, all right, so what is maybe the same about the way you do check in, check out as how it's always been, and then what are some things that are pretty different?
Well, one of the things I want to highlight is that actually, even though we struggled with the data collection, just having that system in place really did help some of our kids. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things we found is that the data collection is actually, I think, really important for us, but sometimes the intervention stands and works for kids, even if the data collection isn't pristine. The other thing that happened, I think, is a conceptual shift. I think we were thinking over the summer about the program. And essentially, its theory of action is apply adult attention and approval to some extent to student behavior in order to change student behavior. Mm-hmm. And one of the kind of the pieces that came into our view is the work by B.J. Fogg, who's a mm-hmm. professor at Stanford, wrote a book called Tiny Habits, which is essentially his explanation of why any behavior happens. And he has this relatively simple model that makes a lot of sense about the degree of motivation you have, the degree of ability you have, and whether or not you have a prompt. And if those three things come together, then you have a behavior. And it makes sense that this would apply to unexpected behaviors and our expected behaviors as well. And then we were, I think, also really, thinking about if we have this system of essentially applying adult pressure to make those behaviors more enticing for kids, what happens once we remove that adult pressure? And I think we were really wanting to come at it more from a place of a more intrinsically motivated change, because most kids don't want to be on that radar. They don't want to be always in trouble. They don't want to imagine themselves as a bad kid. They want to do well. They want to learn. They want to be a part of a functioning and vibrant classroom community. They want, the approval of their, the adults that matter to them. And so we were really trying to think about a way that we could help kids and give them the tools to begin to make behavioral changes to take them in the directions that they wanted to go. So we then took that model, the FOG behavior model, and just kind of imagined, well, what if this was the way that we thought about helping kids change their own behaviors by building a tiny habit and then building another tiny habit on top of that. The other piece that one of the things we really wanted to do was, rather than get everybody really good at the complexity of check-in, check-out, was to try to simplify it as much as possible. So it was just one thing, so that kids were focusing on one thing, so teachers were focusing on one thing. And if we could make that really crisp and clear for kids and for teachers, that we thought there'd be more fidelity, more compliance, because it's easier, just to make it easier for everyone. So if you're just looking for one thing from a student, and you can think back and think, oh yeah, this period, that student raised their hand to ask a question, good, and moving on, as opposed to this kind of evaluation of really high level abstractions in the classroom.
So the idea then was to take it from, were you respectful, were you responsible, were you compassionate? Like, we're not getting rid of those values, but instead we're going to focus on one way that a student might live those values out loud. Who decided that? Who decided what the student would work on?
The student did. We actually designed this whole different, we designed this whole different intake where we had kids envision the kind of student they wanted to be, or what it would be like for them to be a student that was respectful, responsible, compassionate. What would that look like? As they think about other students they admired, what kinds of things did they see? And then they did this great process. I think it's called focus mapping. Am I getting the word right?
Yeah, I think so.
Where you put on a grid all of these possible things you could do to make, to move yourself toward that goal. And it really helped kids focus in on things that would matter and things that were easy, so that they could do. So what's the next easiest step that will move me toward that goal? Oh, well, so the one example I could think of, an early student in the program, was a student who was just not submitting any work. This was, I think we'd entered remote learning at this point also. So everything was on Google Classroom. And really the habit that he picked, he realized that he was not opening the Google Classroom assignments because of that feeling he would get when he saw it, and he knew that he wouldn't be able to do it well and do a perfect job. And so his habit was simply that he would open the Google Classroom assignment, and he would say, I can't remember what exactly he would say, something like, well, all right, I'm going to do it. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. And then he would clap. He clapped for himself, right? So there's always this little celebration at the end of doing the habit. And then he actually began to submit work. That was the only thing we changed with him, was that one habit of opening the assignment, saying this thing to himself, and clapping. And it was that little habit was enough to kind of launch him into the chain of, oh, well, maybe I can, write a sentence, or maybe I can do the next little thing. And then, and so that was the idea, that kids would kind of start to build a habit. Once they got a habit in place, they would look for the next habit, all moving them toward a goal. And once they hit the goal, they would be able to exit. So for that student, the goal is, we have a 4-point grading scale. It was a 2.5 in all of his classes. And he kept working toward that goal really for a year that he was working with that coach.
And what I'm really struck by is, Mary, you had said that one of the issues with check-in, check-out as classically designed is, at least as you experienced it at Orange Grove anyway, was that the values were really big and were either very aspirational, which is good. That's what a value is. If it's not aspirational, then why are we striving to achieve it? And yet, the thing that really helps that particular student perhaps be more responsible was chunking it down to the ittiest bittiest possible thing. And that's something that we always know as educators to do, that if something is too hard or too complex, or is, a student is struggling with something, the thing to do is to break it down to the smallest kind of thing. Like, Mary, how did you see that actually unfolding as you got started? And also, by the way, they were, just for my listeners, a lot of this work was happening in the middle of pandemic land on remote learning. So it's another thing too, just to note that yeah, Mary and Mark definitely live their values out loud. If they say they want things to be student-centered, that's how it's going to be. And we did it even in COVID land. But Mary, how did that shake out in terms of you know what, we want you to be a respectful, responsible, and compassionate student. We're going to start with, can you click on the Google Classroom?
Well, I will tell you, I was really skeptical of this at first when Mark was kind of pitching the BJ Fogg model to me. He did a really good job of kind of having us play with the model and the idea in our own lives. And that really kind of helped me wrap my head around it. So I remember going through the motions of like, just wanting to get up in the morning and exercise, and Mark being like, all right, well, literally the tiny habit is you're just going to put on your shoes. And for me, that was like, that didn't feel good enough. And how am I going to get this massive change and this massive shift in my life by just putting on my shoes? And so I pushed back against this model at first. But then what I saw in kids was, and I was concerned, I have to backtrack and say, I was concerned that this was going to feel not good enough for teachers. Like, if you have this kid who is kind of spiraling or struggling in your classroom, and the energy that some of those kids take on the daily basis from a teacher, like, how are they going to feel about rewarding and celebrating and kind of acknowledging this really tiny habit when they're sort of spiraling out of control in all other capacities? I was really worried about how this was going to translate. But what I have witnessed is really what's happening is kids are feeling success early on because it's attainable, it's meaningful because they designed it. And that feeling of success generates a desire to keep pushing and doing more. And really, the kids who have been highly successful in the program, they're going way above this tiny habit, and they're generalizing it. It's becoming evident that they're succeeding in all sorts of other ways, even though really they're just focused on this tiny habit. And then the other thing that's happening, because they're experiencing this success and because they're checking in with a coach day in, day out, is they're developing relationships that are positive, and they're accountable to somebody that they really care about and that they have really developed a strong rapport with. And that accountability makes them want to do better and more. And so what's so inspiring to me is, I'm thinking of a young man last year who, I mean, he was constantly in my office. And then the minute he got into check in, check out, and he's working on this super tiny habit, and if that's all he were accomplishing, I probably would still be sitting in my office. But the thing is he was accomplishing that and that success and that relationship. He was just blossoming in every other area. So what became clear to me is, they go way beyond that tiny habit. It really, I think the success in the relationship, the success that they can achieve from that tiny habit and the relationship that they get from that coach, the kids just blossom.
So it's interesting because what I'm hearing is one of the strengths of check in, check out, and why it's been, one of those for 40 years has been a pretty highly researched intervention. One of the strengths of check in, check out has always been the coaches, really. The coaches at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, and how oftentimes that relationship between coach, student, and teacher can really blossom into a beautiful kind of advocacy that a student really didn't have before.
I really overthought how this would translate into the classroom, but our teachers and most educators, like they recognize and know that different students need different things. And I have been blown away by how supportive our staff has been to just narrow it down to this super tiny, minuscule habit and get fully on board with saying, all right, if all I'm going to get out of Johnny today is that he's going to take his pencil out, I'm willing and happy to call that success. And we have not had any pushback on that. Our teachers have been amazingly supportive of giving the kids the space they need to just gradually build.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think about one student in particular last year who was having just a real problem in one class in choir. And I think you probably know what I'm talking about, but he for whatever reason, like he just did not want to be there. This is in our school, kids have some degree of choice over their arts course, and he did not get the course that he wanted. He really wanted to be in visual art. So, it wasn't a teacher thing. It was just, he didn't get his preference, but all sorts of unexpected behaviors, on the back of that. And his coach focused with him. Initially, the habit was, I think, to point his feet straight forward toward the front of the class. It was about the stepping stones of a good posture in choir, because he was kind of all over the place and all over the room. And I think it started with something that small, did he just get his feet in the right spot? And I even heard that, and I thought, like, there's no way this is going to work, right? Because everything else is going so badly for the kid in this class, and his behavior is not acceptable, that the feet are not going to help. But it actually, I think it stacked up from there. He got the feet, then he got his knee, then he got to standing at the right time and sitting at the right time, then he got the shoulders back. And for whatever reason, that was just, and I don't know all the steps in between, but eventually he actually then requested to be back in choir the next year. And it became this class that he really took off in and really loved. And I don't know, to me, that was just a great example of something that I thought was so insignificant that there's no way. And thinking about the student too, like, no, that's not going to happen, but it worked. And that was an exceptional coach-student relationship also. There was, deep caring was built.
Yes.
Yeah. This all lives and breathes with the coaches, right, and how they're trained and things like that. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'd love to talk a bit more about what had to happen for students to experience check in, check out differently.
Youth on Their Own is a local nonprofit that supports the high school graduation and continued success of Pima County youth experiencing homelessness. Since its founding in 1986, Youth on Their Own has helped thousands of young people graduate from high school and pursue their dreams. If you'd like to get involved, consider donating to Yodo's Mini Mall. Starting now, Yodo will be collecting food, hygiene products, and school supplies to help homeless youth in our community. If you'd like to make a financial contribution, don't forget that all donations to Yodo are tax deductible, and if you live in Arizona, eligible for the Arizona Charitable Tax Credit. For more information, go to yoto.org or follow Yodo on Facebook or Instagram.
Well, welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about just some beautiful examples of how simple habits of, take your feet, point them in the right way. Well, I guess my feet are here. I may as well have my knees up. I may as well sit up straight. I may as well have my shoulders back. I may as well sing. One of the things I'm kind of curious about is knowing that student and knowing what a traditional check-in, check-out would have been. And if that same coach had a different task of, I'm here to coach you to be more respectful, responsible, and compassionate in choir. What would the difference have been?
I don't know, Mary, what do you think? I don't think it would have worked. I think it would have felt like compliance. It would have felt like he was being checked and, dinged about whether or not he complied and whether or not he was being respectful and kind of doing the things he was supposed to do, as opposed to, and that's so much, to be respectful through a whole class of choir, really, that's a lot. But if, for him, he really found success, like, okay, I can put my feet forward. I can do that. I hate the rest of this, but I can put my feet forward. And I don't know, he felt that little spark and was able to build.
Well, and I think it aligns everybody towards a common success goal that they can all celebrate, no matter how small it is. And I think that's the most powerful piece, is that we can generate this feeling of success and accomplishment. And that is easier to do if you have a tiny habit to focus on versus like, I need you to be this respectful, responsible, compassionate student for an entire period, 5 days a week. And he may not have hit all the marks every class period. He probably didn't, but he left most class periods knowing and receiving feedback and hearing from his teacher that he met his goal that day. And for a kid who struggles and is constantly, maybe more often than not, hearing negative feedback, it's a big deal to receive that positive feedback and hear that you're being successful. So I think that's the power in this, is it narrows it down and it gives everybody a place to land on where they can positively praise and support success. And then once they experience that, then they want more.
I have an idea too. I don't know if this is true, but I have a feeling that it also can de-escalate things for the teacher, because I know that as a teacher, I always felt when there was a gap between what I expected of my kids and what they were displaying, I felt that stress. Like I did not, if there was a child that was way out of line with my expectations, until that child's behavior was back in line with my standard, I felt a great degree of stress, and it's a lot to get a student there sometimes. And I just have this idea that it also helps teachers hunt the good. So we all know that positive attention and feedback is really valuable, but giving a teacher and just saying, look, this is what you look for. You just look for this one thing, and if he's gotten that or she's gotten that, then you're good. Because I think teachers that really care deeply about their work feel tremendous responsibility to move those students to a place where they can be successful 100% of the time. And that's just not always possible on a daily basis. It is over time, but it's not. And so I don't know. Talking about this, it makes me want to go and talk to those teachers and see if that was true. But
if all I need to do is help the student get a pencil from backpack to hand.
Yeah.
And then we can focus on whether or not that gets any sentences written down next week. Right now, the pencil, we can't even get a pencil out. So we really can't get anywhere. If all I have to do is worry about that for now and support the student with that, that's a very different expectation than also write a 5-paragraph essay. That's pretty swell, actually. Well, let's take a break. And when we return, I'd love to talk a bit more about how it's going. Educational inequity is real, but equity is possible, and you can achieve it in your schools. You can change the story. School Leadership for Social Justice helps educators, schools, and districts start, deepen, and sustain their educational equity work and accelerate academic excellence. SLSJ is an IRS-recognized 501c3 serving schools, districts, and education-adjacent organizations. Contact Dr. Charla Horton-Williams, co-founder of School Leadership for Social Justice today, at charla@slsj.us. All right, and welcome back. So we've been talking with Mark Ruben-Tolles, principal of Orange Grove Middle School, and Mary Franco, assistant principal, about centering youth voice in check and check out, which is a standard behavior intervention, especially for schools who are implementing positive behavior interventions and support. Now, I can tell you, I just want to share you the other side of this too, is I've also been very, very excited about what we see, what has been happening at Orange Grove, and in terms of just the outcomes for students, but also just the great experience the staff have had with check and check out. And so I've been sharing it with people. I can tell you that when I share this journey with people who are deep into the PBIS world for a while, they've honestly been highly resistant to this approach. And so what I'm wondering is what you might say to someone who believes, actually, Orange Grove, you really need to go back to generic point cards and adult-driven goals.
Well, I guess that makes me curious about why they would want us to. I mean, we are not going back. We're not going back to that country. Just because what we are seeing for kids is better for us in the way that we have done it here. And just more powerful, and the results have been more clear. I don't know. I mean, I guess we probably aren't in compliance with that model. I agree. It's just hard for me to imagine gaining more by moving to that model. I'm not sure what we would, how that would make our kids' lives better.
I mean, I guess for me, Tim's whole central theme here is centralizing youth voice, and I'm always going to be a major supporter of any system or program or process that does just that. I mean, it's always going to be more powerful when the kid is involved, when they're going to feel more buy-in. They're going to feel less like this is, here we go again, a bunch of adults sitting around and talking about all the things that I'm doing wrong and what I need to do better. And they're just going to naturally feel defensive about that and a desire to buck against that despite its best intention. Anytime that I've been involved in a process, whether it's, the check in, check out, or, an IEP meeting, or just a conversation that I'm having with a family about attendance, I always want the kid at the table. Their input is the most valuable. They are the ones living the experience. They are the ones who know more than anybody sitting around that table what this means for them and what life is like for them in this experience. And I'm always going to be in favor of involving them, and I don't want to discount that. And our system just is so much more individualized and customizable, and it involves the student every step of the way. And I just think that's powerful.
And the things to note, I just want my listeners to know, if you're familiar with check and check out, the truth is that Orange Grove Middle School did check and check out the classic way for a while. And a lot of this work, it happened because the outcomes were simply better with a more student-centered approach, is really what it comes down to it. So from what I'm wondering from a data perspective, what other data might you be able to point to that shows that this is working?
Probably the primary data would be discipline records, right? So our kids get, fed into this system. Now we've expanded it so that kids have to be referred from more than one teacher to be online, unless, there's some other circumstance or staff member. It can be outside, it can be, but different contexts. And what we have just seen is, we have a little spreadsheet that tracks those referrals as they pop in, and most kids after 6 weeks, they're no longer meeting the criteria for being in check in, check out. They may have set other goals that are more lofty, but they wouldn't, that kid at the end of that program wouldn't be referred anymore, which that's what you're going for, right?
And the other thing that it's kind of enabled us to do is, I think now the kids who are genuinely, truly eligible for a more intense tier 3 support, we're much clearer on who those students are. And our tier 2 team has seen that, where we'll come back and we'll look at our caseload of students who are being serviced by check in, check out, and every meeting it's kind of like, okay, they're doing great, they're on track, they're meeting, they're moving right along, we've seen improvements. And then every now and then there'll be this one student who it's like, wow, this really isn't working. And man, they're getting so much support at that point that I feel very confident recommending them for a tier 3 support at that point. And it's very few students. And the other thing I want to mention that we have failed to say is that we have really started moving this towards servicing 3 different possible branches of students. We have this available for students who are hitting on the radar with discipline, but we are also able to service students who have social emotional needs and students who have academic needs.
Well, Mark and Mary, I just really appreciate just your candor and just your explanation of what you did, which again sounds pretty simple. It kind of kept check and check out structurally very similar, but instead of the coach saying, I need you to be these 3 values for all the periods of the day all the time, what one thing can we do that you think is going to make a difference for you, and let me help you with that. That small but huge shift, right, sounds like has really made the difference in terms of the success of how check and check out works at Orange Grove. Well, I'm just really grateful. I thank you for being with us today and for sharing your experience with our listeners. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed our show, and I hope you reached out to any of us on the show too with your thoughts on our conversation. You can find Orange Grove Middle School at ogms.cfsd16.org, and you can find me at www.tgseducationalconsulting.com. Until next time, may you have as many opportunities to be as generous with yourself as you are with those you serve.